Good day, everyone. For those of you that I have not met, my name is Craig Greeley, and I will run you through this presentation this week for Module 2 on the 5 project process groups. As you're all very familiar and aware at this point, this presentation covers the merger of American Airlines and US Airways as it relates to our fictitious organization, where we are looking to similarly acquire and merge with a major competitor that happens to be as part of our current market. Though not specifically required, I feel it's important to initially start the presentation by discussing some of the background information with regards to American Airlines and US Airways as it relates to their merger. And then I'll get into discussing the 5 project process groups of initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, closure before conclusion. As part of each and as part of the module presentation requirements for this week, I've included the appropriate examples where they're indicated, as well as you'll find in the final 2 slides the references that I utilize for my presentation. According to the article from Hayward 2020, one of the major influences behind the merger of these 2 organizations in 2013 was due to that of the bankruptcy and the financial issues facing both airlines in the early to mid 2000s. The terrorist attacks in September of 2001, followed by the financial crisis of 2008, had a significant impact on American Airlines, to which it filed for bankruptcy protection in 2011. US Airways similarly faced the same troubles. However, it faced bankruptcy in 2004 after a failed acquisition by United Airlines. The history of these 2 airlines is filled with mergers and acquisitions of other airlines and routes within the United States. However, the action by US Airways to the end of 2010 positioned itself as the stronger airline through its recovery efforts. American Airlines, on the other hand, needed a solution that was actively investigating possible mergers going into that time period. The organization signed a non-disclosure agreement in August of 2012, public announcement in February 2013, and public trading began on the 9th of December 2013. However, and of interesting note, the 2 organizations officially merged reservation systems on the 17th of October 2013. This is the day the 2 airlines are said to have officially married, according to Rush 2013. In doing so, the new American Airlines became the largest airline in the world. The project initiation group, despite what the name may suggest, is in my opinion not the first step of a project. What I mean by this is that a formal project at this stage has not been initiated, but it is more of a conceptual stage as described by McNeil 2021. However, within this process group, it is established why a project is being initiated, and information is detailed as to what the value it will deliver on conclusion. That said, this group may establish more than a single idea that could evolve into a project. It is with this information that an organization can engage with both internal and external stakeholders to secure buy-in on a particular project. Broadly speaking, the process of project initiation involves 4 steps: project charter or business case. During this step, the goals, purpose, scope, stakeholders, and potentially in terms of a business case and analysis is conducted with an estimate of the return on investment to demonstrate the value of a project. Stakeholder information and pitching your project. This is the second step, and as the name suggests, it is an assembly of those important players for a project are identified and briefed on the project. It is argued at this stage is where an organization receives approval. However, one needs to consider the third step as well. The third step is a feasibility study. Potentially, this step is not as discrete as is identified. The purpose is to study, review, and confirm that a project is able to achieve approval with the resources available and that there is enough value to make it worthwhile. I argue that this is likely done in part or prior to the second step, as it logically does not make sense to brief someone on a project that is later conducted or concluded to not be of worth. As such, there may be some overlap in these steps. Finally, teams and tools. This is the final step where the team, tool, and resources are assembled to pursue a project. As noted previously, US Airways was seeing an increase in profits and success through 2011, which was not the same for American Airlines. The financial crisis coming out of 2008 and other factors ultimately drove American Airlines to file for bankruptcy protection in 2011. From American Airlines' perspective, it is noted that the company was ultimately looking for a strategy to get out of bankruptcy, and internally through 2011 and 2012 has had been discussing a merger as a possible solution. US Airways, on the other hand, was still recovering from its earlier financial problems and the merger it had with America West Airlines. Sloan 2016 describes that US Airways in 2010 was considering a potential merger with United Airlines as part of a restructuring plan. However, this never materialized, with United eventually merging with Continental. As such, airline mergers in US history are seemingly very common. The desire for US Airways to merge with another one of the available airlines, whether it be United, American, or Delta, was of great desire to the company. Beyond finances, Lawton 2013 input from the various unions, rationalization of route networks, and efficiencies for maintenance repairs as some of the major drivers behind US Airways ultimately wanting to merge. It is argued that the project was initiated around 2012 timeframe, as both airlines considered the merger at that time. The primary output of this group is the creation of the project plan and roadmap of the project, Newton 2015. This document captures the entire project from end to end, from initiation through to closure. As such, it is during this phase of the project where various other elements are documented and combined with other plans to give shape to what needs to be executed by the project teams. As such, the purpose of this phase is to define the requirements, costs, schedule, deliverable, and dates and resources necessary. It is described that of the various phases, this is the phase that may likely take up as much as half of the overall timeline for the project. It is important to take the time required for this phase, as it defines what, where, and how the project team will navigate to the end state. As noted, some of the major items produced during this phase are the project plan, the work breakdown structure, a high-level schedule, budget, and other plans. As discussed, the merger of these airlines came at a time when they were both facing financial troubles. Despite US Airways having a stronger position in the market than American, it was actively looking for a restructuring solution to cope with its own financial issues, and American Airlines was in need of a solution to get out of bankruptcy. Chris Isidore, 2013, notes the significant pressure that the major unions were having on American airline management to go forward with the merger. This was of increasing pressure because US Airways CEO, Doug Parker at the time, was vocal of his desire to merge with American ever since learning that the company had filed for bankruptcy. It can only be assumed that given these pressures, that American was somewhat forced into accepting a merger despite their desire to remain independent. However, some resources describe this activity as US Airways actually purchasing or acquiring American and taking their resources. In summary, US Airways is viewed as having an opportunity to purchase American while they were bankrupt and in need of a solution. While American aimed to remain independent, the internal pressure may have forced the company to accept a merger, whereas additional time may have provided other solutions, such as merging with another airline. A project has been approved, a plan is being created, and the time has come to proceed with required deliverables. This is the purpose of the Project Execution Process Group, Newton 2015. The project team works in accordance with the project plan, communicating and utilizing the necessary resources to achieve the end state goal. This phase is considered to be where the bulk of the actual work is conducted, and activities within this phase include tasks to meet the project objectives, obtaining quotes, bids, and proposals, managing resources, risks, and collecting and communicating data and reports. Bruce McDonald, 2014, describes some of the major issues that affected the merger through 2013. Once the merger was approved by US Airways stockholders and American creditors, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a suit seeking to block the merger as a result of lack of competition in the market following the merger. Ultimately, following the merger, there would be considered to be too few competitors in the U.S. to keep prices in check. Specifically, It was accused that the merger would result in price coordination between the major airlines, as well as cutting the total number of seats available to again thus increase prices. Overall, the merger would not be of the benefit of consumers and travelers. In a situation where the Department of Justice saw the merger resulting in less competition, the two airlines saw it the other way, in that there would be more competition on routes, schedules, and an ability to service more airports. As an example, American lacked a presence on the East Coast going into the merger, but the merger ultimately would open up the company to new routes the U.S. Airways had at that time. The Project Monitoring and Control Group, as it sounds, monitors the execution of the project, reviewing and comparing action against the project plan and revisiting accordingly. As such, this group is seen somewhat as a return loop, and while categorized as its own group, this is not always the case. Some authors, noting Newton 2015, view this group as being combined with the execution group. The reason for this is because the theory and logic is that the project team should always be conducting this task to ensure that the project is successful. To accomplish this goal, it is essential that the data is collected and reported on. Again, Newton 2015 describes the importance of this process and the fact that project managers far too often act on old or inaccurate data as a result of poor data collection practices. In addition to this, project teams often report on inaccurate data that is not a realistic representation of where a task, group, or team is within a specific function. This is to say that they sometimes often overinflate data, which only compounds the problems even more. As a result, it is important that the project team establish sound data capturing processes. In situations where the data indicates so, the project team and manager make a decision to update the project plan accordingly. This may also be the result of newly identified risks. They may also need to be captured along the way. As previously identified, the suit with the United States Department of Justice was the biggest variable that changed when the merger was approved internally. Following the announcement of the suit and going into November of 2013, a settlement was finally reached. As part of the settlement, the companies had to give up gate slots and takeoffs at some of the major U.S. airports, such as Washington's Reagan, New York's LaGuardia, Boston's Logan, and Los Angeles' LAX. In addition to the United States Department of Justice suit, an attempt by U.S. consumer groups and travel agents was made to stop the merger as well. Similar to the concerns of the U.S. Department of Justice, it was argued that the merger would cause irreparable injury to the U.S. airline industry by causing a dramatic increase in prices and damaging services. This is according to Rush 2013. However, this attempt was blocked by the United States Supreme Court. In addition, though not specifically stated openly, it has been assumed that the joining of aircrews, technicians, agents, facilities, frequent flyer programs, and alliances was at a point to be discussed, navigated, and decided upon. Isidore 2013 notes that prior to the merger, there was a dramatic increase in pilots calling in sick, as well as maintenance errors, flight delays, and cancellations. This is for American. As such, the reputation of these airlines needed to be taken into consideration and how this would ultimately affect the final merger. The final process group, and one that is often forgotten about, is that of project closure. While it's important that the project team celebrate the success of the project and what was just accomplished, it is important that the member of the team continue to work on capturing lessons learned, handling and disposal of materials, documentations, closing of accounts, contracts, and deallocation of final resources. Of those presented, that of lessons learned is of important note. While it's argued that this is an ongoing activity and one that is not left until the very end, it is important to ensure that lessons learned are captured and approved and passed on to future projects. As such, this should capture what was done well or poor, how can it be repeated or avoided in the future, and overall recommendations by the chain of command. To successfully merge, there was a need for a new operating certificate for the aircraft, joining of employees, moving of facilities, combining reservation systems and technologies, the litigation of various suits that were brought forward, combining of frequent flyer programs, establishment of new contracts, and establishing what the new management staff would look like for this joint airline. One could argue that the formal project existed between early 2012 until December of 2013. However, there were a considerable number of additional tasks that lasted into 2015 that still jeopardized the merger up until that point. As such, there were many tasks that existed well beyond the point where the two companies merged and began trading on the stock exchange under a single organization. In conclusion, there's a difference of opinion that exists between whether the joining of US Airways and American Airlines was a merger or if US Airways bought American Airlines. Was the action born out of a mutual desire to grow and for the benefit of travelers, or did US Airways see an opportunity to expand by buying American Airlines? From a project perspective, it was argued that the steps between the two may be different. However, little is available online in terms of actual processes that the organizations went through as part of this overall project. In addition, and despite companies formally joining in 2013, there were many tasks that extended far beyond this point. It was noted that there were specifically 4 additional tasks in 2015 that even to that day jeopardized the overall merger of these airlines. Finally, lessons learned is an activity to take place throughout all of the project phases. As part of the project activity, it is important to continually document and track lessons learned and not wait until the end of the project and project closure. While the US-American merger is somewhat short in duration, many important points could have been missed if waiting until the end of a project to document both the positive and negative lessons.